I used to watch Daniel count minutes like coins, stacking them in careful piles he never spent. He would step through the door with the tired triumph of a man who had outrun the clock again, loosen his tie, and glance toward the hallway where our son waited with the bright patience of morning. Daniel would smile and promise the same gentle vow he always made. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow would be ours. He believed time was a faithful river that would keep looping back, offering the same quiet banks for skipping stones. After dinner, he would open his laptop, saying he only needed a little while to finish one more email, one more slide, one more call that never seemed to end. The lamp on his desk would throw a warm circle on the wall, while the rest of the house dimmed, like a stage light insisting the real story was still on hold. Our boy would linger at the doorway with a baseball glove, then drift to the rug and build cities out of blocks, laying out streets as straight as his hope. He narrated his own adventures in a small voice that did not push, because he had learned that pushing made the promise wobble. He would leave his drawings where Daniel sat, a handful of paper boats launched toward a father who was always nearly ready to sail. I told myself that love sometimes looked like work. I told myself that seasons changed and that families were made of patience as much as they were made of laughter. I watched Daniel's eyes soften whenever he tucked our son in, watched his fingers trace the air as if he could gather the day he had missed. He always believed in another chance. He loved the idea of the future so fiercely that he did not see it quietly replacing the present. There were nights when the house felt like a clock, each room a gear that kept turning whether we were in it or not. The sink ticked with the slow drip of a faucet. The dryer hummed a steady rhythm. Shadows stretched across the hallway like long hands, reaching for something they could not hold. I stood in the doorway and listened to Daniel's keyboard, a fast rain against the keys, and told myself that storms pass. Our son fell asleep with the glove beside his pillow. Fingers curled over the leather as if he were holding on to a small promise that would be there at sunrise. Daniel closed his laptop near midnight and whispered that tomorrow would finally be the day. He believed it. I wanted to believe it with him. The house exhaled, the clock continued, and the river of time slipped past our windows in the dark, carrying little pieces of today like leaves we were too busy to notice floating away. Days grew into months, the way shadows lengthen without anyone noticing. At first, our son still carried his glove into the living room, still left his drawings where Daniel could find them. But slowly, like a candle burning low, those small gestures dimmed. The glove began to gather dust on a shelf. The crayons stayed in their box, their tips sharp from disuse. He no longer asked if Daniel could come outside. Instead, he busied himself quietly, as if childhood had learned to fold its wings and wait in silence. Daniel, though, started to notice the change. It came in tiny ways that pressed against him when he least expected. He would pass our son's room and see him reading alone, lips moving around, words meant to be shared. He would watch from the doorway as Lego castles grew higher without his help. And when he called out, the boy would nod politely but keep building, his hands steady, his gaze elsewhere. Work still wrapped itself around Daniel like a heavy coat. He told himself he was doing it for us, for a safer tomorrow. Yet the silence of the house became harder to ignore. He came home to fewer questions, fewer stories waiting at the dinner table. The laughter that once spilled freely now felt locked behind a door he no longer had the key to. One evening, after another late meeting, Daniel found a box on the hallway shelf. Inside were little drawings from years ago, folded and forgotten. Stick figures with wide smiles, a father and son holding hands, a sun drawn in uneven yellow strokes. On the back of one, written in clumsy letters, were the words, "Play with me tomorrow." His chest tightened as if the paper itself carried weight heavier than stone. He realized that those tomorrows had stacked into a wall behind him, impossible to climb back over. Our son, now taller, spoke less about games and more about school projects and friends. His voice carried a maturity that had crept in while Daniel's eyes were on his computer screen. The boy still loved his father, but it was a love less eager, more patient. Like a book left open on a table, waiting but no longer calling. Daniel began to feel the ache of something slipping beyond his reach. He stayed up later than before, not with work but with thought, staring at the glow of his screen without seeing the words. The sound of laughter in his memory echoed louder than the quiet of the house. He was beginning to understand what he had traded away, and yet he did not know how to stop the clock that seemed to run faster with each passing day. The silence in the growing distance was no longer gentle. It was a reminder. Each unspoken request, each absent question, each night when the baseball glove stayed untouched, was a quiet verdict he could not escape. Time was teaching him its hardest lesson, one moment at a time. Daniel noticed it most one Saturday morning when sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor and his son walked in, taller than he remembered, with shoulders beginning to carry the shape of a young man. There was no baseball glove, no crayon drawing, only a phone in his hand and a polite smile that did not linger long. In that instant, Daniel felt the years like stones in his pockets. The boy who once tugged at his sleeve was now standing at the threshold of his own world, and Daniel realized he had missed the chapters in between. He sat down at the table after his son left for a friend's house, and his hands trembled as they brushed across the wooden surface, searching for echoes of little fingers that used to tap impatient rhythms there. The silence was heavy, not with anger, but with absence. It was the weight of moments unlived, the weight of tomorrow after tomorrow slipping through his grasp until there were no more left to give. That afternoon, Daniel wandered into the attic. He opened a box he hadn't touched in years, filled with toys and faded drawings. There, in the dust and the soft light filtering through the window, he felt time speaking to him. It whispered that childhood does not wait, that tomorrow is not a guarantee but a fragile thread that can snap without warning. He sank into the old wooden chair and covered his face with his hands, the ache of regret rising like a tide. When his son returned later, Daniel called him into the living room. For a moment he hesitated, afraid of what years of distance might have done. But when the boy sat down, Daniel put the phone aside, leaned forward, and asked if he wanted to talk. It wasn't a game of catch, nor a tower of blocks, but it was a beginning. His son looked surprised, then nodded, and the two of them spoke for the first time in a long while, their words slow but real. Daniel understood then that he could not buy back the lost days. Childhood had slipped past him, as silent and unstoppable as a river flowing out to sea. But he also understood that the present was still in his hands, fragile but alive. He could not go back to the boy with a glove, but he could walk beside the young man his son was becoming. The lesson carved itself deep into him. Time is not a vault where moments wait. It is a flame, burning whether or not we notice, and once the wick is gone, it cannot be relit. From that day forward, Daniel chose today over tomorrow. He closed his laptop earlier, listened longer, and let love interrupt him without hesitation. And though he would always feel the sting of what he had missed, he found peace in knowing that the river of time still carried them both, and that he could, at last, step into the water instead of watching it slip away. Time is the one treasure we can never store away. It flows, silent and steady, no matter how tightly we hold on. Daniel's story reminds us that love belongs to the present moment, not to promises of tomorrow. Each laugh shared, each hand held, each conversation that feels small today becomes priceless in memory. If we wait too long, life quietly moves on without us. So pause, look around, and give your time to those who matter most. That gift, given now, will outlast every clock. If this story touched you, share it with someone you love, and subscribe for more stories like this.